Duplicating invoices allows users to clone existing invoices without having to rekey lots of data every time. To begin, start by locating an invoice that you wish to duplicate. These invoices can be in any state. I'm going to choose the EBSCO123 invoice. And here I see an invoice that is in open status from fiscal year TFY 2023. It has an attached invoice line in an ongoing state. Within the Actions menu, I have the ability to edit and approve, but I can also duplicate. Clicking Duplicate will bring up the prompt. Are you sure you want to create a duplicate of the invoice and of all invoice lines? Clicking Duplicate creates a new invoice, and this new invoice is in fiscal year TFY 2024. It will always open in the new fiscal year and have a status of open, and will also import any additional invoice lines. From here, you can add a line from another POL, you can add a new blank line, you can go into the invoice line and make any edits you want. You can also edit the invoice itself and change the fiscal year to any valid fiscal year, any other changes you might want to make.
Routing in Folio allows libraries to divert received materials away from the normal receiving process and workflow and direct them to alternate locations for pre-circulation distribution or other special handling. Before demonstrating the process of routing, we must first look at the settings and configuration. Routing only has two pieces to configure. Both are located in Settings and Orders. The first is the routing address. Since routing allows for the selection of users, we need to designate which address type is going to be associated with routing. Typically, it is going to be a work or campus type of address. And more specifically, routing only looks at the address one field of that address. In this instance, the designated address type is work, but any address type can be created and defined as routing, or libraries may even wish to create a designated routing type. The other component is list configuration, which defines the parameters for what the printed routing list should look like. When selecting the list configuration, there is an available preview of the template content, and you can also then go in and edit. The full text editor allows for free text as well as markers and macros to include, for instance, the first name and last name. Specific to routing, we have an open and close users tag because this is a repeating area that allows the selection of the first name, last name, and or routing address. Please also note that formatting can be applied to any of these. So a name can be bolded or italicized or underlined, and other rich text can be configured in this way. We include tags for the routing list name, any related notes, as well as user-specific data. The only required field in a routing list is the routing list name, but no data is required specifically for template content. When you are satisfied with your template, preview will show what the routing name actually looks like. In this case, I put routing name in larger font, bolded, then 2 spaces to make a check mark, followed by user information, and then I have any routing notes in small italic. And this is just a demonstration of what is possible when creating the template. Once configuration is complete, we can now go on to the routing list itself. Routing lists can be accessed both in orders and in receiving. Normally, we look at orders. I've gone ahead and created an order with a purchase order line. The routing list is actually at the POL level. So going into that PO line from this overview page, scrolling down, we see routing lists as an accordion with a 0. This shows that there are no routing lists assigned to this PO line. We'll also note that this PO line has 3 physical pieces, and routing lists can only be associated with physical pieces. This means that the order type has to be physical or a physical electronic mix. So we add a routing list, and as mentioned, the name is required, so we'll do routing list 1. And you could add any notes, and these are notes that can be printed on the routing list. So it is possible to create a routing list that simply says, for instance, put on magazine rack, save and close, and then we have a routing list that simply has instructions to put it on the magazine rack. Alternately, you can have for processing. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And then I'm going to add some users. Now we have the standard user search modal, and to keep things simple, I've created a handful of users, and I'm going to select all 3 of these. If you prioritize users in a routing list, you can rearrange through simple drag and drop. You can add more users, you can unassign all users, but I'm going to leave this the way it is, save and close. Now, if we scroll down to the routing lists, we see that there is 1 routing list assigned. From here, we have a couple of options. So I can go straight to receive, or I can close this and click on receiving. I'm going to receive from here, and now we come to the receiving page. I open up the receiving page, and here we have a couple of alerts. The first is this title has routing. So now I know there are routing lists attached, and the routing lists accordion is opened. So routing list 1, I can go in, I have notes, and I see a list of users. And directly from here, I have actions where I can add an additional routing list, and I can have as many routing lists as I have physical pieces to receive. And then I have the option to print the routing lists. Clicking on print brings up the standard print preview, and this is the routing list based on the parameters shown before. So here we have routing list 1, which is the name of the routing list. I have the recipients in the order selected. They have the address 1 field from their work address, and then the instructions, in this case, return to technical services for processing when routing complete. In this case, I have it saved as a PDF, but I can also define it to print to a local printer. Viewing the routing list, I have access to that same routing list here, and I can edit the routing list, again, in exactly the same way that we could with the purchase order line. It is the same routing list, and it is accessible from both locations. This concludes the overview of routing lists in Folio. The process begins in the Orders app at the PO line level, where staff may designate a PO line as Bindery active. This allows users to locate Bindery active pieces to be bound. Please note that the Bindery active flag can be set or unset even if the order status is open. So in this case, this is an open order, and we can set or unset the bindery active flag. When bindery active has been set, receiving workflow is automatically set to independent order and receipt quantity. This is necessary because we are assigning additional pieces in the receiving app at the point of binding. But don't worry, it won't throw off encumbrances or anything else. So with an existing PO line that has been designated as bindery active, we can then go to the receiving app and find receiving records. In this case, if we have a long list of pieces, we can either search through the normal means, but we also have a bindery active filter. And in this case, bindery active has been set to yes. So if I remove that, it clears out. But with bindery active set to yes, we now have only bindery active pieces. We'll select one of these pieces, and now we have our usual receiving list of expected and received pieces. In this case, binding only allows activity on pieces that have been received. So the actions menu under expected is normal, what we would expect, but under the receiving accordion, we now have some additional options, including bind pieces, as well as filtering on whether a piece is bound or not bound. If we wish to bind pieces, we simply click the Bind Pieces button, and then we can choose whichever pieces need to be bound. So in this case, we have the second half of 2023 and the first half of 2024. So we'll do the second half of 2023. So July, August, September, October, November, and December. These are all selected. We can assign a barcode to this, a call number. Call number is not required. If no call number is assigned, then the call number associated with the existing holdings will be used, and the call number will then be the derived call number. Or you can add your own new call number to overwrite that. Because we are creating an item, material type must be selected, as well as permanent loan type and permanent location. Permanent location will start with any location that exists for the existing holdings, but you can assign a new holding for this location for your bound pieces. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and stick with the main library. Then clicking on bind, we'll simply create a bound piece. We scroll down to the bottom of the screen and we now see a list of bound items. Additionally, we see that the pieces that we just bound no longer show up in the received accordion. If I go in and uncheck not bound and check bound, we can now see the pieces that have been received and bound. So they don't go away, they are simply suppressed from view. Under bound items, we have the barcodes of the item records that have been bound. A closer look at the item record brings this up in the inventory application, and we can see usual item record information. We can make any edits that we want to. Scrolling down to the bottom, we also now see a new accordion called Bound Pieces Data. Since these pieces were not item records, they were simply piece records, there is no barcode associated with them. But we do see the display summary, expected receipt date, and other enumeration and chronology information that may have been added. The X's next to these pieces exist so that you can disassociate the bound piece in the event that an error was made or you need to unbind a piece. Unbinding is possible. It is currently a manual action and involves unchecking all of these pieces. Please also note that the item is in process. And that is how we designate that it is still being worked on and not currently available for circulation. A number of libraries want to create the item record when they send the piece out to the bindery rather than when it returns from the bindery, and this is a way to indicate that it's there but not available. We return to the receiving pieces, and again, we will show only the bound pieces. Take a look at September 2023, and we still have the original receiving piece details. And because there was no item, the item status is undefined. If there had been an item record, that new item would be unavailable. One more little note to show in the edit piece of the receiving app, there is a bound that is now checked. Unchecking this bound checkbox will effectively remove the piece from the bound item and will cause the piece to display in the receiving accordion with other unbound pieces. So what if there are existing item records and perhaps they have holds on them or other outstanding requests? Let me switch to another example here. In this case, we have Folio Quarterly. This is also flagged for binding. Currently, there are no associated bound items, but we'll notice that the winter, spring, summer, and fall pieces do have associated barcodes, which means there are associated item records. If I go in and look at these, it has a status of in process, and if I look at the associated item record, we'll notice there are multiple requests on this piece. So we return back to receiving app and go in and we choose to bind. Let's bind the pieces, and we will choose all of the 2023 pieces. Select our required components, including material type and a permanent location. And then once again, we may click bind. This time, however, we have requests on 22222 and 33333. And we are prompted, do we want to transfer requests to the new record? If we choose to transfer, then requests will be transferred from the existing items to the newly bound item. If we do not transfer the requests, then the requests remain with the original item records, and those requests will not be fulfilled because they cease to be attached to a circulating item. And then you can go through and process those manually if you so choose. And then cancel simply gets us back out of to this screen to decide what to do if we have additional processing we may want to do, or if we may want to do manual transferring of requests.
Central ordering feature in an ECS tenant. First, you have to enable central ordering from the central tenant, and specifically from the central tenant's settings application. So I've logged in to the central tenant in this environment. I'll navigate to the settings application, to the consortium manager area in central tenant settings, where I'll find network ordering, and under network ordering, central ordering as a subheading. Here, I need to click allow users to select locations from all tenants when creating central orders in order to enable this. I'll then get a warning that this, in the current version of Folio, cannot be disabled. So once you activate central ordering, it will stay on in this tenant. I'm going to confirm, and that activates, once I save, the central ordering feature. So I'll see a toast message, and then a note above this setting that just again confirms at this time, once it's enabled, it cannot be disabled. The second thing you'll need to do in the respective data tenants, so I'll choose one, we'll go to college as an example. In this environment, there's a college tenant. In the settings application of each of the data tenants, under the orders settings, you also have network ordering settings, central ordering. Here, you set the default for the receiving area. In receiving, you can see both central orders and local orders. This will determine what options a user will have in the receiving area when central ordering is enabled in the member tenants. So in the college tenant, for example, I have 4 options. I can choose active affiliation only, which would mean right now my active affiliation is college. So when I'm in the receiving application, I would only ever see college orders. So meaning I won't have access to central orders in receiving, like central receiving records either in that receiving application. If I've set central only, then I will only see receiving records that relate to central orders in the receiving area of this member tenant or data tenant. If I pick central as default, then whenever the user navigates to that area, by default, they will have the central tab selected. So they'll be searching through receiving records of central orders. And if they have active affiliation selected, then in my case, because my active affiliation is college, if I go to the receiving app, by default, the college tab would be selected, and I would be searching through receiving records related to local orders in the college tenant. So we would choose one of these settings. Typically, if all of the acquisition is going to be done from the central tenant for National Library, for example, then you might choose central only. If this was going to be used in the context of a consortium that had multiple member libraries and the central ordering was done by a central office, then you might set active affiliation as the default. So when users typically land in the receiving area of a member tenant, they're searching through their local orders, but if they need to do receiving for central related to central ordering, then they can select the other tab and search through that and carry on their workflow that way. For this example, I'm just going to save as central only. We'll navigate to the receiving app in the college tenant here, and we'll see basically the receiving app looks like it would any other time. However, when we do our searches here, we're actually finding receiving records that relate to central orders.
Order centrally is very similar to creating an order in any given tenant or in a single tenant variant of Folio. The unique thing is you must be in the central tenant, so active affiliation in the top right, set to the central tenant of the system to create a central order. To do so, we'll start the Orders tab. We'll create something new. I'm going to use a template, in this case, just a simple Amazon template that's in the testing environment data. And the difference will happen, or you'll see the difference when you add a purchase order line. So in this case, I'm going to select a title, just any title from the system. These are all shared instances, meaning that these instances were added to the system centrally as well, so they're available in all tenants. Central orders must be associated with a shared instance. And all of the other purchase order line data is essentially the same. The one difference will be in the locations accordion, you must select an affiliation before selecting a location. So when I add a new location set, I first need to choose an affiliation, and I will only see the tenants that I am affiliated with. So my user is affiliated with all 3 of these tenants in the system, so I can choose from any of those 3. If there were an existing holdings for this instance in that particular tenant, I could associate this quantity with that existing holdings. Otherwise, I can choose from a location within that tenant using the lookup and associate my quantity with that. If the workflow, the receiving workflow is synchronized for this thing and create items including inventory, holdings and items, then those things will be created in the tenant that you have selected that's affiliated with this location. So in the on-site general collections tenant is where my holdings and items will be created for this order. If I had more than one unit of quantity, that's okay. I can add additional locations, even from different tenants, to a single order. So now I'm going to be creating a piece that's associated with general collections and a piece that's associated with Asian on-site, and the resulting holdings and items will be created in those respective tenants associated with those respective locations. And that will happen when I open the order, as it does normally with ordering. So I'll submit this. That's going to create the order, open the order and create all of the inventory artifacts. So I can receive this order from the central tenant. In the central tenant, when I select the piece, when I select the receiving title, I will see all of the pieces based on my affiliation. So we have 2 pieces here, one for general collections, one for the division collections. I'm affiliated with both of those tenants, so I see both of those pieces. If I switch my affiliation to an individual tenant, let's say General Collections, within this tenant, when I select that particular title, I will only see the pieces that are related to my active affiliation. So in this tenant, I will only see the pieces that are related to this tenant, which is why even though I'm affiliated with both, and if I were in the central tenant, I could see both, in this local tenant, I see only the relevant piece data. And I can do the receiving, all the receiving workflow here from this tenant locally as well. Central role management is performed from the Consortia Manager in an enhanced Consortia support enabled environment. So you start by logging into Folio and arriving at the central tenant. So the user that you're logged in as must have permissions for the Consortia Manager in the central tenant. In this system, that central tenant is called Consortium. So from the central tenant, we'll click on the Consortia Manager, and here we'll see two options: authorization policies and authorization roles. At this time, authorization policies is only a view area. So in this area, users should be able to view all existing authorization policies, search and filter through them all and their details. Similar to other areas, at the top of the results pane, so the second pane being where all of the authorization policies are shown, first you would select which tenant's policies you'd like to look at. So here we can choose the college tenant, the consortium, the central tenant, any of the individual tenants to view the authorization policies that are available in those tenants. Looking at authorization roles, we have a similar pattern. So to see the authorization roles that are available in each tenant, you would select from the dropdown above. Depending on what tenants your user is affiliated with, you will have different options in this menu. So if my user was only affiliated with one of these tenants, maybe the college tenant, even though I'm able to access the Consortia Manager area, I would only be able to view roles for the college tenant. If you are affiliated with those tenants but you don't see them in the dropdown, it's because you've removed them as a selection for your context for the Consortia Manager. So Consortia Manager is always navigated in the context of users' selected affiliations. Again, my user has 3 affiliations, so I can have the context of as many as 3 tenants here. If I remove one from the list, that changes the options I have as I'm navigating through Consortia Manager. So for the purpose of this test, you'll want to make sure that all of your affiliations are selected. Then you would navigate to the authorization roles area and confirm that you can see the roles that are present for each member tenant. More than that, I could actually edit the individual roles that exist in individual member tenants. Beyond that, in order to work with actual shared roles or centrally managed roles, you'll need to make sure that you've selected the central tenant. Again, in this case, the consortia tenant. If you have selected the consortia or the central tenant, you'll have the option to actually share roles. So when looking at the particular role and clicking the action menu, I'll have a share to all option. Share to all will result in role being shared to all of the underlying tenants. You'll see a modal before, and you have to confirm that essentially you want to carry through with this share action. There's some errors happening right now, but this should, at the time of the test, be possible. For a given role, you can edit the capability sets associated with that role. If the role is shared, then editing the role in the context of the central tenant should edit all of the underlying tenants' version of that role. So again, if it's a centrally managed role, it must be edited from the consortial tenant, and making any changes to that role will affect the role of the same name that exists in the underlying data tenants. When it comes to assigned users, the user assignment will be independent for every given tenant. So if I were to assign a few users to this role for the central tenant, and this role was shared, when I select one of the other tenants and I choose that shared role, you'll notice that the user assignments are empty. Essentially, I would have to assign users from this specific tenant to the role if I want those users to be granted this role within that tenant. So if I want users to have, in the college tenant, to have this particular role and all of the capabilities that it provides the user, then I have to make sure that I actually assign their user record in this tenant to that role.